I'm going to do an intro, and then,
Oh.
and then I'm going to leave, and you guys can do whatever.
That'll be our problem. Okay, fine.
So yes, I'd like to welcome you all to the Bringing New Work to the IETF tutorial. I'm Karen O'Donohue. I'm part of the leadership of the education team here. And so there's a couple things I'm going to ask of you before I intro the two speakers. The first one is on the last slide. There's a link to a survey. We would really appreciate feedback on this survey. The second thing that we would really like feedback on is what types of tutorials would be of use to you. We're trying to figure out what most people would find useful. So if you could provide both of those sets of information, it would be very appreciated. So the second thing is, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this tutorial. We've been working for a while to try and get it scheduled. And with no further ado, this is Spencer and Aaliyah, and they can introduce themselves further. Y'all have a good tutorial.
So the first thing is, since we don't have a giant room, or rather we have a giant room and we don't have a lot of folks, those of you in the back, if you want to come forward, and also like making this interactive would be really nice, because talking to a dead room is pretty boring and we won't get the kind of discussion and quality. That said, why do I care about new work proposals? Well, I've been doing the IETF for, actually this is like 20 years. And at the end of it, what we do is we create standards for the internet so that the internet works better. And the internet keeps changing. We need to have new work. We need to have new people. And we need to accommodate the changing industry and internet usage. I stepped down after serving as 4 years as routing AD back in March, and I saw some of the challenges for bringing new work in. I've chartered a few new working groups. I rechartered things. I was also the routing area working group chair, which is a group that's specifically chartered to sort of foster new ideas and provide a forum for them to be discussed. And I've also, had a few ideas. Thank you for coming forward. I've also had a few ideas that have turned into working groups.
We should probably just steal this, shouldn't we?
Yeah,
So, we'll just do it this way. So, I'm Spencer. I'm the currently serving Transport Area Director since 2013. We are responsible for ensuring that working groups in their area produce coherent, coordinated, consistently consistent, and timely output as a contribution to the overall IETF. I mean, this is what we do, basically. I previously served on the IAB, which has oversight of the internet architecture, including the standards process, including BOFs. I started caring about this because I showed up at the IETF and very quickly had a topic that I was bringing to the IETF as a new work proposal. I figured out it was how to get it chartered after asking for a lot of help because I needed a lot of help. It was not chartered, but that was chartered. The next great idea I had was not chartered after 2 BOFs, and I didn't understand why, really. My next proposal for new work was dispatched, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm getting better at it, but there's still a lot of people that don't know how to do this. I kept thinking we can do better than this. So just to talk about what you can do on your own, what you can learn on your own, there is a written process, and it's not very long. There's one RFC that describes this in detail, one section of one RFC that describes this in detail. That's the best current practice. And there are 2 RFCs that are informational guidance about how to do parts of this. And that's kind of what you can find out on your own. But here are the links and the section names and things like that. The informational guidance is actually helpful. The big picture hasn't changed very much since RFC 1603 was issued in 1984. The 2 things I want to emphasize is that area directors have a lot of flexibility in what they charter, and area directors rely a lot on proponents to prepare and advance proposals. Almost all the written process assumes that you need a new working group, but you might not. And if you need a new working group, you might not need a BOF. One of the things I want to be sure and say is that a lot of people would like to think that this process is deterministic. If I do these 11 steps in this order, I'll get a working group automatically. And that's just not true, for better or worse. So we turn our attention to the unwritten process.
So I'm going to assume that you all can read the slides and we can actually have a bit of conversation about it. I mean, the main question before you get started is, are you trying to do engineering? Are you still doing research? Are there people who care about this? Have you talked to them about it? Do you know who you should talk to? Can you talk to people to find out who you should talk to? And of course, has this been tried before and why is it different this time? And sometimes things are really different the next time, and people who haven't kept up with what the changes are may be like, yeah, we tried this 15 years ago, it was a dreadful idea. So it's really useful to understand why they think it was a dreadful idea and how to fix it. So,
Oh, sure, yeah. So this is kind of are you in the right place? This is still mostly internet, although we do some widely used protocols. MPLS is a good example that doesn't traverse the internet in a native way. Yeah. You see the problem. Is this protocol work? Is it at or above the IP layer? Because we don't do link layer protocols much. Whatever protocol stack used to be, it probably isn't. And does it need to be standardized? Is interoperability valuable to you or your customers? So this is just the higher order bit. Are you in the right place?
yeah, and one of the pieces to think about for does this have value for you or your customers, or for people who would be using it, is we're not the protocol police. It's really disappointing, but we're still not the protocol police. So getting a good standard is wonderful. And if it sits on a shelf, so to speak, because of course they're not printed either, then there's no point, right? The point is getting standards out that are useful for the industry and for the internet. And so the question is, who's going to use this? Do they believe in the process? Do they think this is a good idea? Are they going to come in and do it? Is there enough forcing function to convince the people who are interested and doing non-interoperable implementations to come and talk? What's their motivation? It's not, as most things aren't, just technology.
Is this really engineering or is this research? The E in IETF stands for engineering, which means we know how to do this. The Internet Research Task Force means the R for research means we will find out how to do this. I wrote an RFC that's an IRTF primer for IRTF participants. It basically explains a lot of the differences between the two organizations in scope, time for you can read this, but recognize, like I say, you need to know how to do at least a high level what you're trying to do before you are talking to the before coming to the IETF when the new work proposal makes sense. Talking to the IRTF chair, if you know that there's a problem but you don't know how to solve it, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, Spencer isn't mentioning that we're both on the IRSG, so if you think you might have research ideas, it's not just the IRTF chair, who's Allison, and really awesome, by the way, to talk to, but any of us with which dot was, the pink dot, really nice hot pink dot to tell you we're going to have some cool research stuff going on. So this is who are you talking to, right? Because fundamentally, when you're bringing new work to the IETF, what you're saying is, we think this matters, and we think there are people, or we know there are people who are willing to do this work. You can talk to area directors for process. There's a lot of folks who have been area directors before, working group chairs who have brought new work. I mean, it's really hard not to run into people in the hallway who might have some ideas about this, and the general thing of, you come with what you want to talk about and enthuse at people and take the introductions, because that's the main piece, is finding the 10 to 20 other people, hopefully more if you're trying to bring something big in, who desperately care about the same things you do. So it's about finding the people who have perspective and getting the introductions to form a community of people who are interested in the work because they know it's necessary. Or alternately, because I think it's a horrible idea, and they'll explain to you in gentle detail why that's the case. Everyone has a different UI, but it, of course, does help to not come in thinking that you're going to change the deployed base of technology over the last 20 years because it solves your key niche problem, right? If you want to do that, you might get some pushback. Oh, and talking. So one of the things is, if you can go back 1 second.
I'm back.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So it's not just the IETF folks you want to talk to because, I mean, there's a lot of folks who are here, sure. There's an awful lot of people who aren't. And one of the things is sometimes your great idea might be pulling in folks from other pieces of industry or academia or where have you that aren't here. Talking to folks, pulling them in and saying, let's do this. The IETF can be extremely open to having new groups of people come in and say, hey, we're working on this and we really want to take advantage of the technical negotiation, consensus-based process that we have here to publish really respected documents, really respected standards. And we need to understand how to do that. You know, that's a great story to bring in.
The related thing there is, you know, basically there are open source projects. The ISG has actually become more interested in who was talking to who on open source about incoming proposals for new work. If your topic is interesting, it's probably interesting to at least some other SDOs and forums, some of which the IETF, the IETF has liaison relationships with them that are managed by the IEB, others not. The IEB and ISG will be very interested in hearing about those earlier rather than later. The heads had been tied before. There are proposals that keep coming back in various forms. Sometimes situations change, so previous failures would succeed. I'm a transport area director. And transport had basically stagnated because we couldn't get anything deployed at the transport level that wasn't already deployed without rolling new versions of operating systems into the hosts. How often do you upgrade your Windows or or Mac system? That's how fast you can change TCP. The way we've implemented it, and middle boxes wouldn't pass things that they weren't expecting, so nobody put anything in the host that middle boxes would pass. You see where this is headed. So many things were tried, and but one of the things that's changed is that we started doing encapsulation over UDP, which does get you out of the kernel on the end systems, does get you through the firewalls and NATs because they know how to do UDP, which is the encapsulating protocol. So something changed, and we were able to charter the quick working group, which is probably the most active one in the transport area right now. There are classic things that you wish you could do, but I mean you just can't. You know, how do you guess initial path capacity without probing? That was like a hot topic in 1985. People still want to do it. People have bought me proposals in the last year to do it, and you still can't. I mean, it's just, you know, how would you know? You want to know whether something like your idea has been tried before, and if it has, you want to know why it's going to be different this time.
And so then there's a question of how much work are you talking about? Are you saying, here, let's toss a new TLV into a routing protocol? Or are you talking something nice and small, theoretically? Are you talking about something fairly large where you need to, say, do a new protocol or have a serious extension of one? Or are you talking something like, yeah, there's this whole industry out there and we need to define all of the standards for it now? Right, how large is the proposal that you're talking about? A lot of people, when they come into the IETF, come in with sort of a thing which is fairly small, you know, a draft, a small idea that they're thinking about, and they just need to figure out where to put it. It turns out that if you don't have to go through the process of figuring out how to create a working group or how to break a giant piece of work into smaller chunks, it's actually really fast to get stuff, faster to get stuff done, right? Because you can have a draft and say, what working group does it go to?
So I think this here is about the point at which we move from things that everybody in IETF leadership would kind of agree with to the things that Spencer has been talking to the ISG and IEB about for the last couple of years. We have not been talking about these things very much in front of the community, and I think it's time for that to change. So what you're getting here is kind of the way the world looked to me. So yeah, actually, this is the transition point.
Yeah. So we talked about, small proposals, what working group is a good thing to do it in. Now, a lot of the different areas have, routing has a routing area working group, art has the dispatch working group, security now has a sec dispatch, transport area has the transport area working group. You're getting the sense here. Ops has an ops AWG working group. There's usually a working group, which is a good place to come and say, at least to the chair, say, I've got this idea, I'm not sure where it fits, or to the ADs and say, does it fit here? Does it make sense to present this and see if there's some interest? And, then you can start seeing, is there interest in that basic idea? For large proposals, what you're doing when you're coming with a large proposal is you're saying, here is a non-trivial amount of work that's probably going to be multiple years to do. And are there folks is there enough of a community of interest to sustain it? Is there a clear enough vision of what to do? I mean, it's fine to have a long-term vision, but do we understand the steps to actually turn this into something real? And who's going to do the work? And of course, one of the things the IETF does is cross-area review. And so one of the questions is, it's wonderful, that's a great idea, what's it going to break? Because sometimes you can get unexpected interactions. For huge proposals, one of the challenges with huge proposals is it's not that some of them aren't a really good idea, it's that a lot of them come clothed with, well, as I'm thinking about things like the cloud one, right? Or
Sorry. So, small proposals, and we've kind of talked our way through this a little bit, but this should be easy. The English phrase is a piece of cake. So basically, you just need to find something, and I think we have actually said a great deal of this. Yeah. We're both jet lagged. Welcome to the IETF. So key question is, do the benefits outweigh the cost of not doing this? And that if the answer is the benefits outweigh the cost by a significant amount, this should be pretty easy. Large proposals, the kind of ones that Leah was talking about, that's actually what the BCPs and the informational guidance documents are mostly talking about. There may be an appropriate working group now, but it would need to be rechartered to take this work on. You may need a new working group, which means you're talking about chartering a new working group. So you're probably talking to working group chairs and area directors about that. In addition to the things for small proposal steps, you're also building a community. If you bring in a new, help me out, what do they call it, attribute or whatever the heck it is for BGP, that basically go to IDR, and there, people there would care whether it happened or not. But if you're coming in with something where there's not an existing working group, you're going to be building your community yourself. That can involve some informal side meetings, or don't forget that you don't have to do a BOF. But you probably want to ask for help negotiating this maze of chartering, and you can ask. People may volunteer, but ask for help if they don't. This is what I've been spending most of my time talking about with the IESG and the IAB, which is the huge proposals. So you think about what the difference between large proposals and huge proposals are. So the large proposals fit in one area. They map to one working group, which may or may not exist. You may have to create it. But huge proposals also often map onto products and types of networks. So you have lots of interfaces to lots of different things. They don't all use the same protocol. They don't all use the same procedures. And they don't really match the defined IETF standards process. If you're going to succeed, you're going to have to break them up. The ISG will try to do this if you don't give them any other choice, but you really want to do the work for them because they really don't know as much as you know about what you're trying to do.
So, why do we want to break up the huge proposals? Well, it's the interconnections and dependencies, right? If you've got multiple protocols and multiple interfaces, it's hard to get down to enough level of detail in any of them and get the focus. You want to have working groups that can focus on a concrete smallish set of things to get done. It involves potentially work and expertise in multiple areas, and someone who's deeply fascinated by the minutiae of BGP may not be similarly fascinated by the minutiae of crypto algorithms, for instance, even though of course they should be. So there's, having working groups split up based on the areas really helps pull in the communities who might be engaged. And it's not just the communities of intellectual curiosity, right? It's the communities of people who are working in industry and academia, et cetera, to use this stuff, to turn it into running code. And one of the problems here is, it's the standard problem with an elephant. You say, oh, well, that's a trunk, we don't do trunks. Or, oh, that has legs, we don't do transport, that's his problem. And so what happens is these ideas get passed like a hot potato from one point to another. So it's really, really helpful to take your great ideas and break them down into what the different components are.
So this happened. This happened at the first IETF that I was on the IEB for. This happened. This is why we do not have a clouds working group. This is why we do not have a clouds area. We got a proposal for a clouds working group. So a request for new work. What's it going to do? Well, they're going to be cloud application, cloud transport, cloud request routings, cloud by hop stuff, cloud security, cloud operations that mapped onto 6 different IETF areas. We struggle with stuff that maps into 2, and that's now. This was in 2010. So this really happened. And for extra credit, there was a proposal to do this that went to the ISG in the IETF, and about 2 days later, there was a proposal that went to the IRTF to do about 80% of the same work, to create a proposed research group. So it's like, well, this is what it looks like when somebody didn't do their break things down and make it something that we knew how to proceed with, knew how to charter. You may hear an area director say maps and gaps. So what is that? So basically, what are the protocols? What are the interfaces and the functionality of those interfaces? Because we do protocols and operational practices around protocols. What protocols are going to be used that can provide the functionality? What's going to be reused? What's going to be extended? And what's going to have to be invented? Because you're not talking about adding an attribute to BGP. You're talking about coming up with an entirely different protocol that's going to be used on this interface. So you identify the existing working groups that do existing protocols, talking to them about those, talking about existing or new working groups to invent new protocols. They're important. This is important for large proposals, but it's critical for huge proposals.
So before I go on to this, the question I have is, how many of the folks who are here have some new work that they want to be bringing? Do you know? That's awesome. Do you know which category your stuff fits into?
I believe so.
Well, no, sure. I mean, the question is, the point of doing a tutorial is to help you, right? So did this help clarify? What questions do you still have?
Yeah, so this is Brett Jordan. Yes, it has helped, but I still have some fundamental concerns. One, things are very slow. Things tend to be very subjective. And not that you really want something that's deterministic or prescriptive, but on the other end, the subjective side of it seems to be like too far the other way. And so when I look at the process of doing BOFs and setting those up, and those can only be done at a meeting, you can't do those at virtual meetings. And like for this one, well, this is what I've told, right? So I have talked to Ecker and Ben extensively about this, and and Bangkok is really far for a lot of people to attend, and we have an existing community that is significantly large that is wanting to work on this, and so we're trying to figure out how do we do this in the IETF, or do we go to another SDO? But it's like how do you get things going is
Sure.
why I'm here.
So like I say, thank you for asking the question. Thank you for asking it to help us level set. Of course, our thing will be to make sure that we do not have the BOF here in this room. But so I say, you know, my thing on this is basically, just in general, if you're trying to finish quickly, waiting to start is the wrong thing to do. So we're talking about the IETF, but also talking about people who are bringing work to the IETF as well. I want to mention this, because this is probably the best kept secret at the IETF, is the IAB. The IAB is actually chartered in their charter to pay special attention to BOFs and proposals for new work. They do a lot of stuff helping the ISG with that. If you check out, these are links in the presentation, download it and click. If you check out the IAB member roles document, that was something that the IAB approved in 2012, I want to say. And basically, they provide what is called BOF coverage to all the BOFs, doing feedback and things like that, showing it, you know, saying this is the way it looks to the ISG. Most people don't know about that. Those unless they're specifically marked private, anybody can see them. You know, if you know, so please feel free to ask your ask the sponsoring AD about that after a BOF. But the other one, which I was actually talking to the IAB and ISG about before I came up here, is the IAB provides shepherds for new work proposals when ABDs request them. Shepherds can provide architectural guidance or can help improve a BOF proposal to help maximize the chances of a useful outcome. So like I say, if you don't remember anything else that I talked about, remember this, because most people don't know this. It's often, honestly, it's a surprise to some of the people that join the IAB every year that this exists. We had some stuff to hope you remember. 3 IETFs ago, I was talking to the ISG about this. But basically, there's these things that we see from time to time in BOF requests and charters. You know, so I'm going to solve all the problems of the universe, or call it boiling the ocean. So by the time we're looking at a proposal, we're looking at something that can be, you know, done in the relatively 1 to 2 year time frame and limited scope, not Gordian knot, doing multiple things that can be used independently in one clump. The picture that I have of the knife there on the is the third one from the left. That's an actual knife you can order. It costs about $1,500. It does a lot of things. I don't carry one, and probably nobody else at this IETF does either. So that kind of thing, you know, where you're combining lots of different efforts for one product, they're necessary for a product, but not all the interfaces need to be in the same working group in the same area and things like that. So, you know, and then forgetting your audience, which is basically that you get BOF charters that everybody who works on the technology can understand and nobody else can. So that one, and where are we? Oh, sorry. I want to mention this also, just things that you can do, and these are not around BOFs, but these are helping you get to a BOF. So things that you could do in Bangkok without a BOF, where we've created a lot of mailing list requests. We provided more and more ad hoc sign-up rooms. We made it more easy to reserve them in advance. Not, you know, you don't have to wait till you get to an IETF meeting to do that. We've been providing Code Lounge and IETF Lounge space for usually fairly significantly sized groups, you know, of, you know, say 8 to 10 people or something like that that could talk. This evening,
You should come. It's going to be awesome.
at 7 o'clock, we do the Hot RFC talks, and if you talk to Aaron Falk real fast, you could probably even still get on the list for this. But basically, this is, you get 4 minutes in front of people with no opportunity for questions. But you say, this is what I want to be working on. I want to work with other people, and I want to start forming a community. If you think this sounds interesting, follow me out of the room, and we'll figure out what to do next. But so like I say, that happens at 7 o'clock tonight, sir. Yeah. Oh, 6. Yeah. I've got another thing at 7. Sorry. Yeah, 6 to 8. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Perfect. I always tell area directors when they're wrong. Always. We hope people who bring in new work will focus on maps and gaps because it makes it a lot easier to figure out which area director you should be talking to and what you should be talking to them about. You really don't want the ISG to try to figure that out because we're really not very good at it. We're going to want to figure out what's in scope for the IETF versus other SDOs. We're going to want to make a decision to charter a working group or hold a BOF fairly quickly, and we want new proposals for new work to be transparent. And that's actually one of the newest things I think I've seen change in the last 2 or 3 years at the IETF is wanting to put people in front of the community where they can be forming communities of interest and can start to work on things and figure out what the next steps are and things like that. Maybe much faster than you expect if you've been around the IETF for a while.
So one of the things is how the IETF deals with new work has been changing. It used to be that you simply had to have a BOF before you could have a working group. That is not the case now, and has not been the case for 3 years or so or more. There are certainly working groups one can. Sorry? Well, yes, 30 years, but Adrian. But in practice, it used to be more. So this is one of those. It turns out the ISG can be like, oh, yeah, right, we can charter working groups. Let's just charter a working group. You don't have to have a BOF. While I don't know of any specific virtual BOFs, it's certainly something that has been discussed multiple times, and if that makes sense for the community, then that can be the thing to do. I did have one community that turned into basically the BIBL working group, where for the BOF we had to be very careful about having it during the European IETF, the IETF that was meeting in Europe, because that's when that community could make it. And it's quite possible different working groups work differently. It's based on the community, and you can get the right pieces. All of that said, one of the errors, I think, that a lot of proponents come in is they think that if their initial charter, or what they're talking about doing initially, isn't everything they wanted to have, then they're not succeeding in getting the working group that they need. And the reality is that if you can come in and say, look, this is the maps and gaps. We want to give you what we think will take a year to do. And then you see how well it goes. And EDs in general tend to be pretty open to rechartering working groups that are doing well, right? One of the things to think about, at least the way my perspective, right? And because you talked a little bit about the subjectivity, one of the things to think about this is basically, it's kind of like interviewing for a position in a lot of ways. You're trying to convince the AD.
I said what I want you to remember that I said. Now I want you to remember the one thing that Aaliyah's about to say here, because she said this last night to me at dinner, and it was like the invention of fire.
He was really jet lagged. That's my claim. So it's nothing. But basically, when you're doing this, you're trying to get an AD to decide to hire you, either to be a proponent of the group, but basically you're saying, I want to bring this work in, and I can make it succeed. Okay? And so they need to trust that you're able to listen and take input. It doesn't matter if you're the most brilliant person in the world, and we've got a lot of them here. If you can't work with others and take input, that's going to be a red flag, right? And we certainly have had issues with that kind of thing. You need to show that even if you can't build the community yourself, because everyone comes with different skill sets, that you can reach out to other people and help make that happen. I do like to talk. And then the third piece is that you actually have a concrete problem, that you understand how it is. The IETF, we like to talk about the technology and the engineering, and sometimes when folks come in with too much, I won't say marketing jargon, but that's really what I mean, right? If you come in and you say, this is the basic, this is the high concept and so on, then people can't boil it down to what you're really trying to solve. And people who talk at a higher, at that kind of a level, sometimes don't have all of the understanding and the details. So one of the questions is, can you talk all the way down to the details? It's an interview. You're saying, can I not only can you basically hire me to come in and have this work happening in the IETF, and there's a trust piece, and there's I know what I'm talking about, and this is really needed in the industry. It's a persuasion piece, right? It's not, that's part of why the process is subjective, because it depends so deeply on what the industry scenarios are. So I can give you a couple examples, since I think we've got plenty of time, and Spencer can probably give you a few as well, about a couple of the working groups that I chartered. I only chartered 2 of them on it. Well, I mean, basically 2 new ones, right? So one of them was a working group called Beer, and they came in with a radical transformation for how multicast IP forwarding would work. Well, MPLS, multicast, as it turns out, basically MPLS forwarding. And it was really great. It's really cool technology, and at the time, there were a few operators who said, yeah, this looks kind of neat. I don't know if we deploy it, but it's a neat idea, right? And in this case, it was coming from, I don't know, Adrian, is that your recollection? Sorry, you were shrugging. I apologize. Never mind. You can go on. But I was talking about the beer BOF, right? Because we had folks who were like, oh yeah, Adrian was my co-AD at the time. We had folks who were like, oh, this is interesting, but we don't know if we'd really use it. It was a bunch of folks who had been around the IETF for a long time, so they didn't have sort of the credibility piece to do. But it really wasn't clear if it was going to catch on in the industry. And so in that case, I basically made the call, and we charted it as experimental. I said, look, I hear you, this is really cool, but if it's not going to catch on and be used, there's no point in having it be standards track. It'll just muck up the internet architecture. Let's charter experimental and see how it goes. Last thing I did before I stepped down as AD was recharter it to be standards track. All of their drafts now are standards track going forward, right? So this is you didn't get everything, but if you do it, you prove you're confident, you build the industry enthusiasm, it becomes clear that this is a good thing to do. And I think that was the case with beer. Another one was Babel. So this was a little of an outside community to some extent coming in. Babel is an open source project. There's another working group, HomeNet, that really likes it. It's basically an evolved RIP. But the question was, okay, this isn't being pushed by any of the major routing vendors, but there is a community here. It's an open source community. A lot of the folks don't come to the IETF. Can we try and get work done anyway? Can we get work done on the mailing list? Can we be open to let it work? And so it's going along pretty well. It's a little slower than I had hoped, because it turns out that when you have volunteers, it's still the same thing no matter what community they come from, right? But so there's ways of being flexible about what the working group is. And the thing is, the reason that this isn't you must go through this process steps in order to do it is because each working group proposal, each of the large proposals is different. It's a different industry, it's a different community, it's a different set of people stepping forward, and all of those softer attributes matter.
So my thing is with this slide that I'm showing now is not to make a particular set of proponents feel bad, because I don't want to do that. What I want you to learn from is that basically if somebody comes in with a hot product topic and comes into the IETF and says, we want to be able to build that product, which is what you're looking at here, it's very difficult for the IETF to know what to do with that. If you've done the maps and gaps thing and say, well, we know we're going to have transport there, but we think that TCP will be good enough, or we think that we needed to use SCTP, or we think we need to use SCTP, but we need to do 2 things that SCTP doesn't do. So we don't need a cloud transport. We need two extensions to SCTP, and there's a working group that knows how to do that. So this is the doing your homework thing, but it's, like I say, it's not clouds. It was SDN. It was data centers. It was IoT. It's like we get. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Some of the network slicing work is has been the same kind of thing.
So basically, knowing maps and gaps, in my opinion, should be able to take you a long way. Now, Elias just alluded to one other point, which is the changing ISG, which once you've been off the ISG for 6 months, 9 months, 9 months. Once you've been off the ISG for 8 months, which I think was how long it's been since Lee was on the ISG, you start to see things more clearly because the ISG doesn't change very much from week to week. So people who are on the ISG don't ever notice. But looking back, it seems like the ISG is a lot more open to consider taking a chance on something. We've talked about on the ISG. We've talked about a thing called fast charter, fast fail, where instead of it used to be not only Adrian is exactly right. The BCP on the first page of my slides never required a BOF, and it still doesn't because we haven't updated it. Sure. Well, if I could kill that, it would. Yeah. Okay. Now it's gone away, so I can. And that was actually to make sure that we had time to have this conversation and not just Spencer talk the whole time. But I was headed someplace.
You were talking about fast working group charter and fast fail, and one of the pieces, because I think it's useful to think about the balance, right? When ADs charter a working group, when you charter a working group, what you're telling there's a cost to that in terms of how much attention the community ends up paying, how many people are focusing in on it. Sometimes, depending upon the enthusiasm around the working group, there ends up being press and stuff. But the main point is that there's a feeling, I think, from a lot of ADs that there's sort of, you want to make sure that you're chartering things that are reasonable ideas, right? That you're not going to cost the community too much in terms of people's time and attention on things that are just not well formed or understood or going to succeed. And so figuring out what that balance is between, on the one hand, really wanting to pull in new work and continue to expand and grow, understanding the industry's changing, what the internet needs is changing. Absolutely, you need to do that. But on the other side, if you pull in the wrong work, which is to say work that is not well scoped, and that it's very possible to spend a lot of people's time wasted on stuff that doesn't actually go someplace. And so the question is, how do you charter it to be quick to get chartered? What? Sorry, I said quick. Oh, that's fun. Do you twitch when I say quick?
All transport area directors twitch a little bit every time they hear the word quick. But since I've got the microphone anyway, just to reinforce something that Aaliyah said a minute ago, which is if you look at the quick charter, quick working group charter now, there are a couple of things that are named as explicitly out of scope for what the work that they're chartered to do now. One is partial reliability, and one is forward error correction. So basically, we're saying we know we may go there, but adding that at the same time as supporting the HTTP protocol, which is what Quick is chartered to do, would be too much to succeed. And this working group was ambitious from the start. So saying, there are things you can ask me to do as the chartering AD. There are things you can ask me to do that I don't believe can succeed now, but that doesn't make them a bad idea. That doesn't mean I wouldn't consider them in the future. Please deliver the first version, and then we'll talk. And very much what Aaliyah was saying about, deliver the experimental version, get a little understanding of what's going on, and then we'll talk.
Speaking of talking, we've been talking. Would any of you like to say anything? Any feedback, comments, questions? I know you've been listening. Was this what you were expecting to hear? Are there surprises? What else can we tell you about? How else can we help?
I walked out of an ISG IAB lunch to come play with you guys, so please let me be as helpful as I can be.
Hello, I'm Adrian. So I think it's a really useful subject to cover in a tutorial, but I think newcomers struggle because they are engineers and they do need a process to follow. And that you say, yeah, it's a dark art, it's not a strict process, is clear, but it doesn't really help because we're engineers, we need to follow a process. So I have a proposal, which is, would you like to turn this slide set into a flow chart? Possibly with lots of lines and arrows, and possibly actually relatively simple. So it's a sequence of think about this, think about that, make a decision, move on, think about something else, make a decision, that takes you into a general area of this is the type of way you're introducing new work, your piece of new work, because this is its size and scope, and this is the way you're likely to be received. So would you like to do those things? And if your answer is yes, I'd like to help you. And if your answer is no, damn you, I'll do it myself.
Okay, so this is, Adrian was also a third-term area director, which is basically telling you he doesn't understand how to motivate people to do work for him. I'm holding the mic now, so let me answer, and then you can give your answer. But my answer is not before March, for me, because getting sitting area directors to do anything at all is the same thing as getting sitting area directors to do anything at all. But this seems interesting if it is obviously non-deterministic. You know, basically, it's like, well, I mean, this is next hop routing, right? So it's like, you're here, you found your way here somehow, but there's not like a flow chart of the internet saying where the packets go, So I think that's what we're talking about, and if it stays obvious that it's a lot of judgment is involved, but hopefully not too much. Or a lot of judgment is involved, but it's reasonable, or a lot of judgment is involved, but there's a conversation that's happening. This seems like a helpful thing to do. I'll stop talking and let Aaliyah give her answer, and I'll keep thinking.
Well, any excuse to work with you again, Adrian. Seriously, I'm happy to help. I guess, to my mind, basically this falls into, why do you want a standard, build a community who also cares about it, and define what you're actually doing. And it needs to be in that order, because you can come in with an idea, but once you've got the community, what you're actually going to end up doing ends up being different. And all of the rest of this is the nuances of that. So, yeah, I can help you. Helium hand apparently is a problem. Yeah, go on. Oh, yeah, totally. The Edu team has it up somewhere. And it'll be in the proceedings.
It's on the meeting materials page with everything else. On the agenda page,
Yeah. Yeah, no, the slides are definitely available. And I guess the other piece is, as we said at the beginning of the presentation, Spencer and I are up here talking about this because we really care about bringing new work in. And we know that this can seem capricious and dark and unclear. And having been part of the decision-making process, it's still Spencer's headache. We know some of the things that happen that cause it to be painful, and would like to help you when you're interested in trying to bring new work, because we're really glad you want to.
And if I can just follow on something Aaliyah said. So the best current practice that describes this is BCP 25, and that is now RFC 2418. That was a revision of the previous version of that best current practice, which that revision changed things in Section 2 that were like, the IAB used to approve all the working groups after the ISG approved them. That's how far back it's been since we've revised this stuff. Okay, so like if you don't like the Star Trek reference is the Kobayashi Maru, which is if you don't like the simulation, reprogram it. If you don't like the rules, change them, because this stuff didn't come to, this stuff wasn't this way in 1980. These rules came from somewhere. They could change.
Yeah, it's all our sandcastle. But go on.
Yeah, so just on the daunting side of like coming up to speed, some individuals in the organization have this habit of saying, here's 1,000 pages of material, go through here and figure out what you need, and go away and don't come back. And so I would very much support something that and I've talked with Dave Waltermeyer about this, that I've written my first draft, I've submitted it, working on some of these processes, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make little vignette videos for YouTube that go through and says, you want to write your first draft, here's what you need to do, here's how you do it, here's the tools you need to do, make it really simple, 3 minutes max, you're up and going. And I just know, because I do a lot of work in other SDOs, and everyone has its quirks, and everyone has its little things, and ITU's one way, and IEEE's another way, and whatever. But it would really help if there was some really clean and crisp, information. And like, from my standpoint, from the work that I'm, bringing, we have a community, a very large community already that we did 6 months of work before we came to the IETF, weekly meetings. So it's just, I'm just trying to figure out, like, how do you, like, this fast, like, create fast fail, that'd be awesome. Like, you have 12 months to, like, produce your first milestone, and if you don't, you're cut off.
So I joined the IRSG when I was still in the IAB, so some number like 2012. And the deal was basically that Lars Eggert, who was the IRTF chair at the time, was getting proposals that looked an awful lot like they should have gone to the IETF. It's like we have prototypes, we had milestones, he's like, this isn't research. You know how to do this. So basically, the reason I wrote whichever, it's in the slides, but whichever RC 7418, I think it is, there was a primer for the IETF participants who were thinking about the IRTF to say, these are the differences, okay? But one of the things that happened as a result of that was after Lars spent time looking at a lot of proposals, and Lars was a past area director. He was actually a past transport area director like I am now. So he had, kind of the IETF view of the way you consider new work. And after about a year as IRTF chair, he said, forget it. I'm going to basically say you get rooms and you get a mailing list and you get a year. If you can assemble a research community and start looking like a research group, then you must be one. And if you can't do that with a year head start and the resources that I have to give you, you probably don't need to be a research group. The ISG has heard that, and we've talked about reasons that might not be the right thing to do for the IETF, because what we're talking about is engineering stuff. So we should have some confidence that things are going to work, that they can be engineered. But how many of you all know what the internet looked like in 1994 when the last time these process documents were revved in this section? Because I
remember building networks with thicknet and vampire clowns.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the technology. That's the technology of our BCP. Okay. So have we learned anything about networks in the past, mumble years? I struggle with math even when I'm awake. But have we learned anything about engineering networks since then? Yes. Have we learned anything about standardizing them since then? And I think that's a really good question, that the community can be talking about.
But also to your point, so one of the things we said earlier in the presentation was that area directors depend a lot on the proponents to do a lot of the work. And while it can be very tempting to be like, oh, I'm being told to go read this large quantity of stuff, that's not necessarily a go away message. That sometimes is we need to understand how what you're suggesting relates to these things. And so we need you to understand those things in order to be able to express how it relates so we can understand how to map it in. And it might be the case that the correct solution to that kind of a interaction is to find somebody else in the community here who has read those documents or is familiar with them and sit down and have a really good conversation to try and do the maps and gaps. They're not saying you must read these all personally, or saying consider this stuff, I think. I mean, I'm not part of this particular conversation, but that's how I would interpret it.
Yeah, I personally took it as a denial of service. When one of the individuals that told me to go off and read RFC, XYZ, was the author of said RFC, and I had proposed my ideas of what I wanted to do, and they said, well, you need to go read this and find the gaps. And I'm like, well, you wrote the document, could you potentially just, help me along? And the answer was just no.
Yeah. So it's like the truth is always appropriate. You may quote Spencer. I wanted to say something about this, which is basically that recent IASGs, going back to when Aaliyah was on, and I think even I could make a case for even back when Adrian was on, have been trying to give people more tools rather than saying, come back perfect or don't come back, basically. We've made changes at a lot of changes recently. There's small tactical changes. Do we need to change something strategically? That's an interesting conversation to have with the community, because the community is the one that would really make that decision, not the IEB or the ISG. But so like I say, I want, if there are other tools that we need to be providing, let's talk about those also. The IEB and the ISG meet together during the first tutorial slice, and it actually, the way we're scheduled now, a little bit of the second one. So like I say, I'm serious, I walked out for lunch, but I didn't know that we were doing the IETF overview as a webinar. We didn't do that. We didn't do that for 100 IETF meetings in a row, but then we did. Things can change around here, and not just the technology. Tell us what we need to change. We can talk.
Well, if we're on to ads at this point, I guess there's two pieces I would say. The first one, which isn't an ad, is everybody has their own UI and different motivations, and figuring out how to work with different people's UI is highly annoying and nonetheless very productive. And then the second piece is, completely aside from this, you all coming in have a piece of perspective. One of the other things that I'm doing this year, because I volunteered and my number came up, stop, is being part of NOMCOM. And if you're not familiar with what NOMCOM is, just feel free to ask, but basically we're responsible for picking or recommending the leadership, essentially, who have turnover every 2 years. And we need your feedback. It's very easy to get feedback from people who have been in the IETF for mumbledy lots of years, but everyone's coming in with different perspectives, and feedback is really, really, really useful. So if you can, that would be awesome.
That was a perfect response to the question, except for the part that you didn't say, look for the orange dots on the badges, which would tell you who the NOMCOM members are. Aaliyah, I've never been on a NOMCOM as a voting member. I was the IEB liaison in 2011. Aaliyah is a voting member. So you're talking to 1/9 of the voting population of the nominating committee. So like if she tells you that she would like to have more input, that's something to consider.
Yeah, and the usual kind of feedback, right? Smart, actionable details. Not just, oh yeah, he's a great guy, he shook my hand in the hallway. That's not actually very meaningful. Or he didn't turn and run when I said hi. I mean, those are nice to know, basic functionality, but if you can actually give anecdotes or specific pieces, everything in NomCom is confidential. And, we have people who understand security, so it's very confidential. Anyway, that's a complete segue. We are out of time, but we are, I think, happy to talk with anyone who wants to talk more informally, whether it's here or later on. Thank you very much for coming and sitting through our discussions.
Thank you very much. As we say, we're here all week. Happy to talk. And thank you all for coming.